Well, hello everyone. Welcome to this session. So I just wanted to briefly introduce Sahana. One fact that you all may not know is that Sahana and I were actually at undergrad together at MIT, so have known her for a very long time. And so it's a real privilege and honor to welcome her to this stage today and have her be a part of our event. So just wanted to thank her for that. So I'll just wanted to give a brief intro to Sahana. Shahab already touched on it, but I wanted Sahana to kind of talk about her leadership journey. She started out after graduating from MIT. She worked in engineering for a while, then she started at Harvard Business School, and after finishing that, she had a long career at McKinsey, where I believe she ended as a partner, and then started her work at Google as managing director of the GCP of the Google Cloud, and where she's managed large teams. And then finally now she's at Databricks, where she's the global VP of their data strategy and go-to-market strategy. And so I really wanted her to just kind of speak to that journey. I mean, what were the different motivations that you took as you made those career changes along the way?
First, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. Awesome opportunity just to talk to folks. Maybe I'll just start by saying, when I went to MIT, and Nadir talked about this, I never thought I'd be doing what I'm doing now. I thought I'd be coding and building products for my career. But I'd say what MIT gave me was just this incredible foundation of how to think about problems, and I appreciate it even now that I had that education and opportunity. But coming out of MIT, I did my master's there as well, and they have a program there that lets you actually go and work for part of the year when you do your master's, and I actually ended up doing it at Motorola, but I split my time between Chicago and I spent a year in Japan. And I'll talk a little bit about that. I mean, I was 21, and there were 2 engineers in the building. And she and I, for a year, would eat lunch by ourselves because the engineers were segregated. And it was a really eye-opening opportunity for me, just to experience that and experience working in a very, foreign culture. But it also just showed me that, you can appreciate what is different and enjoy it as well. Because, I had great, professional relationships with the entire team, but it was just different, and that's also okay. So I think it was just a really eye-opening moment for me. I think after McKinsey, I probably was a little burned out from coding, frankly, and I wanted to try something different. Had the opportunity to go to McKinsey before and then after at business school. And I think that, that was the first time I had to present in front of executives, and I'd never done that before. Used to be so, I think each of these experiences really helped me learn new skills, figure out that I actually could learn how to present. I wasn't a natural presenter, but when you do things over and over again, you push yourself out of the comfort zone. It really helped me grow as a professional. And then after I made partner, I had the opportunity to actually go to the India office. And I used to serve tech companies out of India, but all over Asia. And I always tell this story because it was kind of a funny story. I came to the India office. At that point, I had my first son. He was a year old. We moved to India. I am of Indian origin, but I've never lived in India, right? I've never worked in India. And I talked to the office manager. I say, hey, I'm the only female partner there, by the way, at that time. And I said, hey, I've got this young child. What's it going to be? How's the travel going to be? I'm really nervous about it. And he's like, no, that'll be fine. But you're going to have to figure out the childcare situation. Like, I think there were no coaching pointers there. But the more interesting part of the conversation was, he's like, hey, you may need to take some accent training. I said, well, tell me more. And he said, well, it might be hard for people to understand you because you have a very American accent. And I said, but you have a German partner. Does he take accent training? He's like, no. I was like, well, then I'm not going to take accent training either. But it was just one of those really interesting moments because you're in like no man's land. Neither are you really feeling American in a true sense, but neither was I really feeling Indian in that sense in that moment either. And those experiences were interesting because what you learn, and I had a number of clients over the years, but in the end it is really your knowledge and what you deliver that matters. And people may perceive it's this thing or the other, but it actually really is about the value you bring to people at a very individual level. And then, after a certain point, we decided to move back here. My husband and I, our parents are here actually, and came to Google. First time I say I had a real job after consulting. Awesome opportunity, learning all about the Valley, which is a unique culture in and of itself. Big company, learn how to, navigate that, which then brings me to Databricks, which is the smallest company I've ever been at. Really incredible opportunity. And I think there's a lot of energy in that that's different from big companies. So I kind of feel, frankly, I look back and I feel lucky for the journey, just the opportunity to be in so many different places and appreciate, what was good, what was not so good about each. But I think every time you put yourself in a different situation, you really get that opportunity to learn. And may not feel that way in the moment, but when you reflect on it, it's always that, I learned that from that experience and I'm bringing it forward. So that's probably the recap.
Wonderful. So I want to unpack a few of those experiences a little bit more, Sahana. So, you spent time in Japan and then a lot of time in India. Now, Japan is known for being a somewhat more hierarchical culture, and you mentioned, the engineers being segregated.
Yeah.
So how do you break through those barriers, to get yourself known or to make more of an impact? How did you go around approaching, changing your perception within those organizations?
I kind of feel that, I think Japan is hierarchical, but companies are hierarchical too. So it's sort of one of those things that's not specific to Japan. But I do think that in most of those cases, the first thing you have to do is prove yourself through content. And it's easy to get caught up in, hey, it's hierarchical, or, even in the US, like, hey, how do you show up as a woman in these like tech companies? But in the end, I do think it's about really focus on what your strength is. It's hard to be someone you're not. So you've really got to dig into what is your strength, bring that forward. And I think the hardest part is how do you speak up? Because when you're in those situations that are hierarchical, even if you show up with content, you have to learn how to present your content in a way that is compelling. So I do think that's sort of the biggest skill, because even if you're good at what you do, you have to find a way to represent that and make yourself known in that way.
So did you take any formal training? I mean, I know you
well,
business school, but presentation and,
I'll tell you what helped me is that actually at MIT, I took Japanese for 4 years.
Okay.
So I think, in a very literal sense, speaking the language actually helps. And in that case, I had enough working Japanese that I wasn't just an engineer. I could actually build a bridge into what they were asking and explain what I was doing in terms that were easier to understand.
Yeah. So you have that mindset of growing beyond, your silo and expanding your skills,
and I think
right?
it is about, hey, you've got to meet people where they are, right? There's some things about what you're doing, but you got to understand where people are coming from and figure out how to build some kind of bridge. And you learn that a ton in consulting. If I were to pull that thread a little bit more, is that you meet clients and they've all got sorts of things going on. And then you are sort of seeing things from a preview, like you go in and you say, hey, this is, kind of the challenges, but maybe that was a project they built. And maybe what you're doing is really criticizing the thing that they worked on for 2-3 years. So I think always going into situations in ways that you can build bridges is super important.
So to dive into that a little bit more, so McKinsey, you're dealing with different clients, as you said. How do you create allies within those clients? Like you said, someone may be protective about their culture or what they created or what their vision is, and your job probably is to go in and criticize that or break it down, right? So how do you go about introducing those ideas? How do you sell it to them, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, it's, like one of my biggest clients, I'll give you this example. One of my biggest clients was at Tata's when I was in Bombay. And obviously, I worked with their telecom group and TCS. And these are very successful companies, very successful individuals who have honestly given their life work to these companies. And you're going in after being there for like 3 weeks, and you're giving them some perspective on the business. And you can imagine the kind of defensiveness, right, that comes with that. We're all humans. And what you learn, and by the time I went to India, I was a partner, so I was in consulting for a while. Super important to establish one-on-one relationships. And that's true, by the way, consulting. It's true for not just consulting. It's true when you work. Building one-on-one relationships, really investing in those makes a huge difference. And this is maybe where I'm old school, that doesn't happen over Zoom or Google Meet or video. Like just taking the time to go have coffee with somebody. I remember most of my clients were at that time, much older than me, been in that industry much longer. And just meeting them and saying, hey, tell me about your career here. Get to know them as people. Many times it's not just about the project you're on. Tell me why you're here for 20 years. Tell me what you want to do with this project. Tell me what you're worried about. And it takes a while to open people up, but I think the more you can really invest in that one-on-one relationship, the more successful you'll be in anything you do. And it's interesting, most of those people, they're still, like over time, you work there, like they're Facebook friends, they're people I meet when I go back. I mean, because they want someone to ask them about their aspirations and their concerns. And when you don't invest in that, I think it's a lost opportunity to build those relationships.
That's really powerful, Sahana, to bring the human side, the interaction, and have empathy for what people are going through. And a lot of times in the business world, we don't necessarily think that way. Some people just are very focused, goal-oriented, or breaking a thing down into its components. But you have to have that human element to really understand what some person's motivations are, and that's a powerful insight. I want to talk a little bit more about your McKinsey experience. That McKinsey is famous for giving you frameworks, for giving you a way to analyze problems and break it down. But then you don't necessarily have the control over how those suggestions or proposals get implemented. So how did you balance that, or what was your perspective on how you drove those proposals through all the way, with your clients, and what was your process for that?
Yeah, I'll say, I feel like I had 2 McKinsey careers. I think the one in the US, where I was in New York, it was a lot more, hey, here's the slides, and then you hope that they do something with it, right? I think being in Asia, it's very different because the nature of the work there was, hey, we're going to work together to make this happen. And what I realized, one of my big projects was, hey, how do we build when you have these wireless networks, you have towers, right? There's land towers and towers on top of buildings. And we were trying to help a telco in Asia build out their network in half the time. It was a time of 3G, to date myself, so everybody was trying to build 3G networks. And we were trying to cut down the time. And, of course, you go out and you're like, how are people building these towers? How do you procure the concrete faster? And I remember having to get on top of buildings and understand, okay, these are the parts. How do we procure those parts faster? How do we get just in time? And one of the things I realized, by the way, one of the reasons I probably left McKinsey was I actually enjoyed the doing more than the sort of identifying the problem. And I think that's what was for me at the end. I was like, this is something that I really enjoy, is actually making the impact happen. And I learned that as a result of working in Asia, and also the nature of growth. At the time, Indonesia was going crazy with Wi-Fi and data. Japan was trying to move into streaming. So there were all these growth industries, and I think I came out of that with, hey, making and building something that's high growth is where my passion is. And that's what really led me to eventually leave and then go to Google. But I think that's an important, each of those are very different skills, the ability to diagnose and structure versus actually operate. I think part of going through your career is learning what excites you.
So what did excite you going to Google? What was that experience like?
Yeah.
It was a time of rapid growth, I guess, with Google Cloud.
It was. I mean, and look, at that time when I joined GCP, I mean, it was kind of like, hey, the cloud thing it's going to be an Amazon and Microsoft game. GCP was super nascent. Google hadn't really gotten deep into enterprise and was pretty small. And I did like the opportunity to grow something. And, GCP I joined was like $3 billion. And when I left, it was, $36 billion. And I think just the opportunity to see how the things you do to actually drive that growth. Okay, you have to have this kind of capability. You have to hire like this. You have to put this in place. That was just awesome learning. And that was, I think, the opportunity to go to Google and actually grow something was why I ended up going there. And you meet these incredible people who are willing to dig in and not just, hey, I'm just going to manage, a big team. But everyone there was so committed to digging in and building, which is why I loved it there. Yeah.
And how big was your team at Google?
My team at Google, I did ops for the first 3 years. My team was probably about 30 to 40, and then I moved over to run the global value team. That was probably a 100-person team. So that was sort of my career over at GCP.
And what was your experience managing these? I guess it's more like a smallish team which started growing, but you're within a very large organization. So again, how do you get visibility and impact within such a big organization as Google?
Yeah, I mean, first I'd say maybe for good or bad, one of my big philosophies, and I'll talk a few, but one is, I think no matter how senior you are, you have to stay in the work. I think you have to be, not everything, but pick one thing. At any one time, I'm always deep in one thing where I know I'm actually contributing. I'm not just asking people or delegating it to somebody. And when I go into meetings, I like to be as deep as everyone on my team. And I think that actually separates you as someone who understands the content, right? There are people, and we've all encountered them, we see them in organizations, managers, that, hey, when you ask them a question, they ask the next person to answer, right? And I never wanted to be that. I wanted to be the person who could answer the question. I think the second thing, have you guys heard of the concept of first team, second team? Raise your hand if you've heard that. So there's this whole concept in leadership about who's your first team and who's your second team. There are leaders who think their first team are the people they're managing, and the real first team are your peers. And I think the idea, and I remember reading about this, like the idea of thinking about your peers as your first team is a pretty powerful idea because it forces you to go lateral. And in big companies, people who go lateral are pretty unusual. And so I would say that investment in, hey, it's hard, but get to know that person in that team who might be critical to your effort, but invest as much in that as you do your team. So that's the second thing I'd say. And the third thing is you've got to be, and it's a bit, I think, the nature of our lives these days, you've got to be curious and learning all the time. And sometimes the pace is overwhelming, right? Which is, at that time, okay, how do we think about, it was early days of AI, how do we think about what would that mean? How do I learn about what can be done? And sometimes the people you learn from are the people junior to you, right? A lot of times we think about mentorship as being those senior people who know more and they're more advanced in their career. I feel like I've learned as much from the people who are junior to me as I have senior to me, right? And that's a really, you always have to find those really smart young people. And if for the young people here, find people who you can help because it's really powerful because they will know things that you don't know and make you aware. And I found that super helpful, actually, in my career.
So how did you create those channels of communication with those team members? Is it like a formal process? You just go and talk to people, like just show up at their desk? Like what?
I think partly you know who the, bright young people are in your teams, and you can reach out. You want to, whether they're in your team or another, you reach out. You say you want to have, do you want to meet? Do you want to, can you help me with this? This is something, I think asking for help as a senior leader, say, hey, can you work with me one-on-one on this project, right? Like skip layers. Many times I'm engaging with people, even now at Databricks, like a couple layers down, because I just find it really helpful to understand that versus, sometimes messages can be lost, content can be lost. But I think working directly with people who are in it is super powerful, and you get to know people, and those are relationships I'll keep, not just the senior ones, but those really bright young people in your teams.
Great. So Sahana, now switching to your current role at Databricks. So what made you make the move from Google to Databricks? Databricks is still, it's a larger organization, but it's still in the startup mode.
Still a startup,
right?
Yeah. It's only 8,000 people, which is much smaller than Google. So when I was on the value team, again, data, AI is picking up momentum, and BigQuery is the Google product. And we kept, we started to lose this company called Databricks. I was like, what's this company? And, started to look into it, and got really excited by the space, frankly. You could just see the momentum, and now, obviously it's all over, but what are companies trying to do with all of this data they create? We've been talking about this promise of data for years and years, and now we have the combination of, the compute layer being what it is, and having these data platforms that allow us to do analysis that used to, frankly, take days and lots of people in hours. I mean, it is mind-boggling, the shift that's happening right now. And, I used to, just doing my research and looked at, Ali and the founder's profile, like 7 PhDs from Berkeley. It was just, I just was pretty compelled by the story, got connected to Databricks, was talking to them for about 6 or 7 months, I think, just to get to know them. They were trying to get to know me, and made the leap because I believed in the vision. Believed in the vision that I think, people are going to do great things with data in the next 10 years. People are going to find new drugs to cure different cancers in the next 10 years, right? We are going to, eradicate diseases, all sorts of diseases. Like I'm pretty bullish on the power of data to make real change, not just, in how we make decisions, but how we change people's lives. And I think we're at a pretty unique point, like I said, both with the compute power we have, the technology we have, the skills that we have, and we're gonna see some incredible leaps. And you guys hear about all these amazing use cases with AI as well. But I think that was what compelled me.
So what kind of conversations are you having at your level about ethical considerations of AI, how we use all this data? You mentioned, the potential for drug discovery and so on, but there's also, safeguards that have to come with that. How do we test that data? How do we keep it safe? There's a lot of different aspects to that.
I mean, that's a great point. I think the first thing I'd say is the amount of security and governance that is needed on the data access first is a major challenge and problem, right? You're ingesting all of this data from different sources. How do we think about the security layer around it? The second is, who has access to it, right? Building those kinds of controls. The third is, hey, how do we test things without exposing that data? And there's a whole market in synthetic data, so we can start to think about how would we get results without actually exposing that data to people. But then also, there's a whole what is possible. I think we're still learning all the different things that we can do by pulling in unstructured data as well as structured data. And companies are experimenting. I think we have a company that's actually trying to use LLMs and history to create, an army of like counselors and agents, digital counselors. We have companies who are using our data to deliver, drugs via drones so they can use the data to actually optimize their flight path. Then we have people who are using it on things that like supply chain. But the security, the governance, the idea of like, how do we think about synthetic data to make sure it's ethical and we protect privacy is a really big part of what we're trying to do.
So how do you see AI shaping how management works now, or how leadership works? We have a huge amount of data at our fingertips. People are even saying things like AI can automate away middle management.
Right.
Do you see that happening? What is the role of a manager or a leader when they have access to all this AI information, but also it can be a peril to, to what they do on a daily basis, right? Do you see those kinds of trends?
Look, I don't see, I'm not maybe in the AI will replace people camp and replace managers, but I do think, number one, we all have to get educated on all the tools that are at our disposal and be able to leverage them, because the expectation of speed and what we have to come up with has radically gone up, right? Hey, an answer that took you 2 days should be back in a few hours. And I also think in terms of decision making, people are assuming, hey, you're going to have an analytic basis for decisions that used to feel more like pattern matching. I'll give you an example. We're trying to figure out, hey, how many people should Databricks hire next year? What's the right answer to that? And in the past, you'd build models, you do things, but we can be way more predictive now with data science than we could in the past. So every decision almost has a data science, ML, AI-led approach in addition to judgment. So I think just the sheer importance of getting educated and aware of all these techniques and all the tools you have, it's kind of an imperative now. So I would say it's a high bar on your AI literacy. And then the other thing is, how do you measure all these efforts, right? It's not just cost savings. It's about what did you know that you didn't know before? And I think there's a lot of those types of areas, things that you just weren't aware of that could impact your business that you need to be now. So a lot of investment in data science teams, in that kind of data engineering investment that's happening out there.
So are there any big opportunities that are exciting you right now that you see looking out in the near future? What's really, do you think, is exciting now in this new world of data, AI, and the convergence of all of that into our everyday lives? Where do you see this going? That's a big question, I know.
That's a big question. Yeah. I mean, I use it to create flashcards for my kids' exam, too. I mean, so I think I think there's what we can do at work, right? Which is, hey, you can use it to get, we have lots of, part of what I do is I look at all of our GTM field. How do you make them more productive? We can tell a given person, for this account, at this time, offer this service, because we've seen that's the most highly adopted. The next step is this. Go offer them this. Now you have to go offer them that. This is the most optimal pricing you can offer. So there's going to be a lot of work in many of these more transactional roles to make it very repeatable. And that's certainly a big enterprise push. The other is, of course, we're all going to be managing people and agents, and these agents are going to go out and get all the information and do things, and we don't have to hire people for those roles. But I think in our daily lives, it is, I think, how many people, raise your hand, how many people use it in their daily life? How many people are using ChatGPT? Yeah, how many people are using all these tools? You use it to plan vacations. You use it to figure out study plans. Use it to do research. I think it's just going to be in every part of our life. And you're going to find, I was using Notebook from Google the other day to help me. I was reading some book, and I was like, oh, can you help me figure out, some perspectives from this book? So I uploaded the digital book, and I was, asking it questions. There's just things that you couldn't do in the past that you can do now. And so it's going to be in every part of our lives. Yeah.
So Sahana, switching gears a little bit, what is your driving kind of values which have led you, along this path. What has been animating you? I know you talked about curiosity, passion to, to explore new areas. But if you could think back to, your personal life or your family life, what are kind of like the values that have driven you in this journey? What kind of advice would you have for people who, are looking for new careers or new professional pathways?
I mean, look, I think first, in this group, I'll say, obviously I'm South Asian. I think that kind of colors in many ways, my value system, right? It's as important for me to do well, but I'm also a wife, a mother, a daughter, and that comes with its own responsibilities, and that probably colors a lot of how my value system has been, developed. What I'd say is, you have to be authentically you in whatever you do, and that comes through. I think you have to take time for what matters in life, and I think that's super important. Obviously, having my kids was a major event. When, and I'll say this is good, my husband got diagnosed with stage 4 cancer 4 years ago. That was a major event. Those things, my dad has Parkinson's. These are things that, impact who you are as a person. And I would just say make sure that you think about what you're doing professionally, but also take time for what you need personally. And if you don't, at some point, you will burn out. Things like that ends up being over time as important as the professional.
So what is like a passion of yours outside of work or a release valve for you? Is it, with the time with your kids? I know you did a lot of work with a nonprofit, Antar. You want to talk about that?
First, obviously, I think there is the day-to-day. We're all in the day-to-day grind. If you've got kids, of like taking them here and there, and if you have time for that, you're great. If you go to their school events, it's great. I think over time, one thing that I have tried to focus on is just, taking time for myself and my health. And that comes in different ways, right? Hey, making sure I'm getting enough sleep, making sure I'm taking time to go work out, making sure I'm eating well. And in many ways, I used to have this mentor at McKinsey. She was, as a director. And she used to say, and for the men in the audience, maybe you'll relate, but she'd say, women are very much the neck of the family. What she meant by that is like they connect so many things. They connect families, they're connecting for their kids, they're connecting, they're in all sorts of places. So I think just the emphasis on being healthy and taking time for yourself in whatever way that means. Does it mean you need time to read a book? Read a book. So I think being a little bit more conscious of that has been just over time. And what I've realized is that it actually makes me better. I'm better at work, I'm better at home, I can think more clearly. So whatever that is, I would just say, make sure, and that's true for all of us. We're all at that time where we're all busy, and whoever you are, I would just say take time for, whatever you need, and that will just make you better professionally. And maybe the last thing, I used to be involved in a nonprofit, and I'll probably try to get back involved, but it was, about driving maternal health in rural communities in India. I do feel we're all obligated to give back in some way, and we should find whatever way that is. I think doing that kind of social work, whether it's here, I volunteer with my son, and I find those are actually some of the most rewarding things I do with the kids, more than actually going, to an event. I find that that's actually pretty rewarding, and I try to do it where I can, but I think giving back is super important.
So finally, Sahana, one word of advice you would give to a young Sahana who's just starting out in her career or in her life, or many words of advice, what would you say to her?
I'd say, be more confident. Be more confident in what you've got and what you can give. I think, when we're early in our careers, we're never sure, is this enough? Is this good enough? I would just say be more confident in who you are and what you can give.
Well, I think, do we have a few minutes for Q&A? I think we have about 3 or 4 minutes. So, Sahana, would you be willing to take a few questions? Yeah? So we'll open it up to everyone in the audience. Yeah. We can go first, yeah? Yeah.
Thank you, Nadir. It was wonderful listening to you. In the end, you talked about this giving part. Would you acknowledge that giving is probably the biggest gift you can give yourself in growth of both your career and your...
I think it's one of those things. If you spend 3 hours volunteering, you feel so amazing at the end of it. And I feel like whenever you give back, you get more from it. And it doesn't have to be that you do, I think what I realized is small things are okay. You can do it in 2-hour increments, 3-hour increments, but doing it is so powerful, and you feel like, I think we're all quite privileged, and it also gives you a different, perspective on how privileged we are. So.
Thank you.
Hi. How do you stay motivated? I know, as a leader, you're probably spending a lot of time motivating others. But how do you, keep yourself motivated so you're keep push yourself, keep driving those results, and yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you have to be, there was a time, maybe not now, there are times when I've had roles or period in my work, like on Sunday night, you have that pit in your stomach. You're like, oh my God, I have to go back to work tomorrow, and it's going to be this, and this is going to happen. And at some point, and I do think, you have to be enjoying, and it sounds a bit glib, but it's true, you kind of have to be enjoying the work you're doing, because it's super hard to stay intensely motivated just for the next promo or for the money. You kind of just have to, I think one thing that maybe it's a realization over time. When I was younger, maybe that was enough. Like, hey, I can just work really hard because I know I'm going to do well. But at some point, it's a long journey, and you're going to get burned out just working like that because you just want to get to the next level. So I do think the importance of finding an area you're interested in and genuinely being interested in it makes a big difference. Like, I genuinely like this topic of data and what it can do, and that just makes it a lot easier for me to stay in it. So that's what I'd say.
I have a question. You said something super interesting about confidence, and that's the advice you'd give your younger self. In hindsight, what helped you build that confidence? Because even sometimes when you're a mom and you get older, you could still use a lot more confidence. How did you get to where you are, and how did you build that?
I partly just say time. I always tell the story. I remember when I was going to go to college, and it was the summer before, and my mom said to me, if you fail out of MIT, you can just come home. And I was like, okay. I don't know if that was I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. I wasn't, I think, even then sure how to take it. But in a way, it was like, okay, failure is okay. Like, it's okay to try something and not do okay. Because at some point, if you're always afraid of failing, you won't put yourself out there. And yeah, you'll get it wrong. Like, I've given some horrible, when I was an analyst, there was some presentations, I couldn't do it. Like, I was terrible. But you know what? You just keep at it, and you get better. And you get better at dealing with, things in whatever you do. So it's just putting yourself out there, and it's okay if sometimes things don't go, and you decide how much risk it is, but I think it's okay if things don't go right every time.
Hello, my name is Sanjida. I'm a student from Berkeley. So one thing I took away from your talk and I really liked is that you talked about how you don't have to always learn from senior people and people who are younger than you. They have really amazing things to give. So I was thinking about right now I'm in college, and you said so much energy in college. So from that perspective, how would I create a project or like do a new startup idea or something and have our classmates or friends join me and do that initiative together? And like, what would be your advice? Like, if you saw yourself in that position now, like, what would you tell me?
So in terms of how to get people engaged, look, I think telling people about what you're doing is this very powerful thing. Right? Like if you're involved in something, first, I do think startups are incredible. I think with what's going on, I think you're going to learn so much in a startup versus necessarily corporate life these days. But I would be at all sorts of events. You know, I would be meeting as many people as possible and telling them what you're doing, because you never know when you're going to meet that person who's going to make things more successful for you or give you that piece of advice that is what you needed, or be that mentor to your startup. You know, like I know lots of people who are, you know, my seniority or higher, who are excited about startups because they want to learn, right? They want to learn what all these new startups are about. We want to know, oh, is that possible? I didn't know that was possible. You know what I mean? So I would just be trying to meet as many people. You'd be surprised how many people are excited about mentoring startups.
Hi. So you've seen a lot of success in your life, and clearly you've had a very fruitful journey. I just wanted to know, have you ever struggled with imposter syndrome? And if so, how did you tackle that? I know it's kind of with the theme of confidence, but I wanted to talk specifically about imposter syndrome.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you, I think, yeah, for sure, yes. I remember when I was leaving Google, I was looking at roles, and really, I was looking at, the Databricks role, and I got offered a COO role of another big company in the Valley. And I was kind of like, can I do this job? Like, yeah, I did the interview. I mean, for real, I was like, can I do this job? It seems like bigger than what I've done. I remember calling, there was a guy who used to work for me, and now he's at a bank, investment bank, covering software, and I called him and I said, what do you think? I've got this offer. By the way, this guy's like 20 years younger than me. And he's like, you can do this job. If you want it, you can do it. And I said, okay, I got it. What I'd say is you kind of need those cheerleaders in your life. You need those people who are going to call, who you can call, and they're going to say, you can do this. Do it. Take the opportunity. It's going to be okay. Many times that's your spouse. Many times it's a really good friend. Sometimes it may be people you get close to in your professional journey. Sometimes it can be someone completely different, sibling, whatever. But you need those cheerleaders. And you have to determine who those cheerleaders are for you. Who you're going to call, and they're going to tell you can do that hard thing. Because it doesn't matter who you are. I think there are moments in all of our lives that we have that, like, can I actually do this? And, having that strong support system is so essential. And if I were to say, hey, what's made me, successful or whatever, it's that. It's just that I've just been blessed to have this incredible family. But I've been able to have this great group, I've had a great spouse, and I've got good friends that I've been able to lean on. So just don't discount that group of people around you, because none of us can really go that far without that.
So for the opposite side, where you have some level of confidence and understanding of the technical depth, and you see that if you were put in that position for the company, that you could make change, but you don't want to overstep, right? So how do you frame it in such a way where, hey, if you promote me in that position, or if you put me in that position, I can get the job done, but you don't want to seem, in some sense, like greedy to be put in that position. yeah, I guess how would you navigate through that?
Well, I think one thing I'll say is people don't promote people until they've seen them playing that role, right? So if you want to be promoted to something, you should act like you're already promoted.
Sorry, not just promotion, but a role that nobody has taken up. So you're creating that role.
You know, my view is to act before taking forgiveness or whatever that phrase is. That's why I like smaller companies. I think in smaller companies, when you see an opportunity, that's something that needs to be done, just step into it. You know, do what needs to be done, and there's always a great deal of appreciation for that. Bigger companies get more complicated because someone will say, that's my job and all of that. But I think at most companies, if you see something that needs to be done and you're willing to put your hand up, people are so delighted that someone's going to actually go do that. You know, so I'd lean forward into that versus, you know, waiting for someone to say it's okay.
Okay, we have 1 minute left. If there are no other questions, we could wrap up. Okay, last question.
All right. Start of the presentation. So you so mentioned the role of like the being the mother as well as like the daughter as well. So my question is regarding the managing of like the quality time with your family and the children. So being like the successful leader with the organization, you spend like the most of the time over there. So how you are able to like manage like quality time with your family?
Oh, that's always a struggle. Look, I've been working ever since my kids were young. They've seen me do my shares of conference calls in the bathroom. Like, they've been through it. Like, they know. I think my kids I'm lucky. They're good kids. They tell me when I need to do stuff sometimes. They're like, I know you're going to forget, so I'm reminding you, you need to go to school today to do that. But I think that children recognize when you're trying to do your best for them. You know, I like to think that it's quality, not quantity. Sometimes I have mom guilt, not gonna lie. But so far they've turned out okay, so I'm gonna stick with that theory. Quality time is hard. I think it's hard. Probably my husband and I talk the most for the 20 minutes we walk the dog, and the rest of the day we're all doing our own thing. You know what I mean? Like, that is the hardest thing, I think, in the lives we all lead. We're busy, everyone's doing their own thing. I would just say you kind of have to schedule it in. Like, that's how it works for me. I have to like schedule it in. Like, hey, when we walk the dog, we don't have our phones. We're not doing anything. That's like the only time we get to talk during the day. But I think the biggest thing for me now is like it's an everyday versus, oh, we need quality time, so we go away for 2 weeks. It's like the daily matters for me more than the big event, right? It's important, like, I'm probably working at home 3 days a week versus going to the office. I love that I see my kids when they come home, and those like 5 minutes when they come home from school, I get to ask them about their day and they tell me what happened. And that's great, because if something's wrong, they'll tell me then. They're not gonna wait till the weekend when I, free up. So certain things have really helped me, like certain time interventions, but that's always a challenge. That is always a challenge, so great question.
Okay, so on that note, we'll wrap up. Please do give a very big hand to Sahana for sharing the mindset of a leader. Thank you so much, Sahana.